dog genome sequence is 95% of the wolf. They just took that and, okay, we need to feed ancestral diet.
Yeah.
Feed them like a wolf. What does a wolf eat?
So whatever you have spoken so far is mostly anecdotal. Where is the scientific consensus on this? Like, do we have enough data?
Now, with so much of researching showing the results otherwise in terms of health benefits, they have accepted it as a mainstream diet.
Oh, great. And people don't know this.
And people don't know because I think I've been very fortunate in life to have worked with some of the best companies like Google and Apple.
What is your opinion on people feeding Parle-G to community animals like dogs and cats?
What goes into these processed foods is 4D meats, that is like diseased meats. Animal waste that humans cannot eat. Traditionally, these dogs were fed horse meat back then.
As a vegan advocate, like I think that is unethical where you are abusing one animal, killing one animal to feed the other animal.
Right. So is that natural?
Yeah.
What is natural is eating a mice.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of this podcast, and today's guest is Hetal, and she's the founder of Curry and Pepper Wellbeing, and she specializes in creating food for companion animals like dogs and cats. But this is where it gets super interesting because she creates plant-based food for these animals, which is either amazing or it can be unethical or super healthy or unhealthy. That's the broad range of perspectives, and we'll deep dive into it to get into the nitty-gritties and discuss with Hetal. So Hetal, welcome, and how are you doing today?
Thanks a lot, Shivam. It's been great to be here and have this conversation. And I'm really excited and looking forward to kind of, sharing this journey.
Yeah. And can you give us a brief introduction about yourself?
So I'm a Silicon Valley techie. Most of my life I spent working with technology and finance. So this was a completely unplanned journey that began like back in 2012 because I had neither any background in animal wellness or healthcare, no background in nutrition. Back then, I was a vegetarian. Being a vegetarian, it was a big no-no for me to like bring meat in when I adopted my dogs. That's how the whole journey about researching, learning began for me. And then it kind of evolved as my dog's journeys evolved. And it kind of, at a point, it just became my mission or my sole purpose in life. So that's how the entire journey from being a Silicon Valley techie to becoming an animal wellness advocate through plants, so now my mission has completely shifted.
So now you are doing this full
time. Yeah.
Okay, and when did you start that?
So the full time I just started like 2.5 years ago when I moved back to India from US. But
okay, so just to clarify, you said in 2012 you started your research, but you were still working at Silicon Valley.
Yes, so I had a daytime job doing my daytime work in the corporate world, and nighttime is when I kind of did this. So I kind of was doing this in parallel for over 8 years, and that's when I realized like, no, this is something I really want to go like dedicate my life kind of towards doing this shift.
Okay, and what was your role at Silicon Valley?
So I've done a lot of different things. I think I've been very fortunate in life to have worked with some of the best companies like Google and Apple and all of that. So doing everything that I wanted to in the tech space because it was a tech journey. And then, so I've kind of been into a lot of technical development projects. And then for the almost last 10 years, I worked as a project manager.
Nice.
Yeah, so I like managing.
You were a developer before and then a project manager?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. So my entire life has been like, I've never done what I've studied, or, it's everything, it's always been unrelated.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
but I guess that's the way the universe led me into things. So I just followed that.
And you were a part of that. So
Right.
anyway, so the point is that you were a part of the glorified life that people look at as Silicon Valley, right?
Right.
And then you quit that job to start your own venture in a space which, while very profitable, but still going the plant-based route. Can you just talk about how your experience of this shift was working here full time?
Sure. So, life in the Silicon Valley was always great because I absolutely loved the technology and finance related work that I did. So it never was a burden. So I think career-wise, that was like a great path. I was in the right direction. But then when I began this curry and pepper journey after my dogs came into my life, it started out with like baking things in my home kitchen. Then eventually we had our own production set up back in California. And, like as it just started evolving, I started kind of realizing that this was something that resonated with my soul more. It was almost like in alignment with my purpose in life. So that's when I knew that I had to kind of do this at some point full time. It was just that I didn't know when or how at that time, because there's a risk factor, right? Like when you switch gears, and it was not my domain at that point in time because I had no clue of like how to run like a food business or anything of that sort. So I decided like I'm just going to do it part time, see how things evolve, and we'll figure it out from there. So I was very consistent in terms of like doing what I did for my day job, making sure I got things done, and then kind of carved time out to do this, and continued following it. But at one point, it kind of really, I felt like, no, I have to kind of move into this like full time, like I really have to make this as my purpose or my mission in life. So that's when I figured, okay, now I need to kind of start thinking, start planning, like because if I were to do something like this in Silicon Valley, financially, it's a huge undertaking. I mean, sure, I could have gone the VC route. I mean, I could have done all of those things. But for me, it was very clear that, I didn't really want to go down that path because I didn't want somebody dictating me just because they were funding that, okay, like, you have to do this, you have to do that, like in terms of the direction where I wanted curry and pepper to be. So it obviously had to be funded by my own self, right? So I had to kind of plan all of that and see how that was going to work out. And then I realized like, if I had to do it on my own finances, it was not going to be viable for me to do it in US. Sure, I could have worked out things, but I also felt like the need here was much bigger, because in the Western world, the shift has already started happening with the animals moving plant-based, And so every year when I visited here, I felt like the mindset was so different. Like in a country where we had largely vegetarian dogs, the shift now is like large amount of dogs and cats have shifted to like eating hardcore meat-based diets, like it's that mindset, oh, dog has to eat meat, otherwise he's going to not thrive, And that was a bit of a shocking thing for me because the cultural background that I grew up back when I was a kid, it was a complete mind shift, right? Like to see that evolution where the Western world is moving in a completely different direction when it came to like animal nutrition. And why is India lagging? Like why is that? So then I figured like, like I had to be here, I had to come here and I had been trying when I was doing this back in the US.
So in US, are there companies already who are making plant-based products?
I mean, they started like in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's nothing new.
Then why is it that in India, the perception is that dogs and cats especially can't be fed plant-based food?
Good question, because we tend to mimic the West for everything now.
Okay.
Right? So there was this huge, I should say it was really, really good marketing with the species appropriate diet, which really took off like in the West and is still doing good, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. And so we are now picking up on that trend, right? Like we have like a lot of people who kind of took up animal nutrition. And if you think about it, like most of the veterinarians, they are all, when they're trained in their veterinary curriculum, nutrition is taught as if the dog has kidney disease, you feed RC this or Sincel that,
As corrective action.
Correct. Right. So they don't have that inherent training or skill or knowledge in the dietary preparations, if you will. And that's why there are so many small animal nutritionists, if you will, around the world who either specialize in like raw food diets, meat-based cooked diets, or a very, very tiny community who does plant-based diets, right? So that's how this whole thing basically evolved because...
So essentially you are saying that it's just a general perception that animals like dogs and cats should be fed animal-based products because that is how people have been doing it culturally?
No, so actually, I think when the species appropriate movement started, right? It was like when they discovered that the dog genome sequence is 95% of the wolf. They just took that and okay, we need to feed ancestral diet, feed them like a wolf. What does a wolf eat? Wolf eats meat, so dogs need meat. They're falling sick, so we need to feed meat. So just a little bit of background in dog food, right? In general. So back in the days, whether it was India or the Western world, doesn't matter. Most of the time, dogs that lived with humans, they ate table scraps from the human diet, right? So in the Indian diet, it was a lot more vegetarian food. So they ate mostly that. And back in the West, like they ate whatever meats, scraps and some veggie scraps that the humans provided, right? This is before World War. Then came in the World War. With the World War, of course, the commodities, food availability, and all that was a big thing, right? So that's when the commercial food production processes began, like taking all this waste matter from human industries and human, like with that whole process. And they started making up dog food, like because they had, I mean, obviously meat was not going to last, fresh meat or fresh food was not going to stay on the shelf for too long. And so that's how this whole industry came up, where they started making kibble, right? So
what is kibble? Like
kibble is the dry pellets or dog food that we feed, like pedigree or whatever,
And that is mostly made from the waste from the animal agricultural food that human consumes.
Yeah, and even euthanized animals sometimes. So even the euthanasia drugs go in there. I mean, there have been so many consistent recalls with a lot of these companies. I think the last biggest one that is happening is with like Royal Canin and a few other brands, where I think there was an official recall from the FDA because certain nutrient levels were off, which could lead to toxicity in the animals, and a lot of animals were affected. So basically, what goes into these processed foods is 4D meats. That is like diseased meats, if you will, animal waste that humans cannot eat, right? So the bones, whatever shavings you have.
That is a common practice even in, so I'm aware of this, that there are some dog shelters in India, and it's a very common practice that they will go to butcher shops and they will buy the remains, that is the waste products there, which humans are not buying, and then they will feed. So I think that mentality has been there. I think brands like these, they have just industrialized the whole process.
There's so much waste now because there's so many, like for example, I'm just quoting US numbers because we don't really have any stats for India at the moment. But the entire meat production that happens in the US, like 70% of it goes for human food, 30% goes for animal food. Okay, this is good meat. Like that's huge amount. Okay. And then there is all the 70% whatever scrap has come out. So as long as you keep creating waste, right, there is some form of recycling because people have to make money at the end of the day. And if you think about all of these commercial pet food brands, it's all about the bottom line, right? Bringing the cost down. How do you do that? You start compromising.
Yes. For that matter, any business, they try to optimize for the bottom line, and essentially whatever the waste is, they try to circulate it back and sell it off. And you are saying that that is one of the major issues in the existing dog and cat food market.
Yeah, so the quality is definitely an issue. While it may meet the quality standards technically, it's not live food, as in like there is no living force or energy in that food because it's so processed, right? And the ingredients that go in it kind of matter as well. And then and that's why after that what came in was the raw food diets, because then people started saying like the rates of cancer increased, after kibble or the dry food that came in. So the rates of cancer shot up, like post
in dogs and cats.
Yeah, in dogs and cats, post like the kibble industry being there. So that's when like people started figuring out what's wrong, and they realized, okay, it's because of the ingredients that go into the kibble kind of a thing, and the processing that it takes to make them is kind of contributing to health issues. So that's then this whole industry around, that's when I think the species appropriate diet movement kicked in, with like feeding them raw diets or buff diets, which is like raw feeding dogs and cats like raw meat, so that went on, that trend. So they were like really good leading veterinary nutritionists. And there are not many around the world. I think if you look at the AVMA directory, you'll find like less than a couple hundred.
If you look at what?
The American Veterinary Association medical directory.
So essentially not many nutritionists in this space.
Yeah, like veterinary nutritionists. Yeah, you can find nutritionists, but not like a vet who's also trained in proper nutrition. Okay. So then, they started like researching this, and that's where they started advocating that, because like a dog he's evolved from a wolf, and they share that 95% sequence with a wolf in terms of their genes. So they should be fed like a wolf. And so that's how this whole raw movement started coming in. And I'm sure they saw some health improvements, like shifting from kibble to feeding raw meat. And I think that became like a big movement. And that's what we here then started mirroring, because there is a lot of mirroring happens that from here with the Western
From West
world.
to India.
Yeah, from West to India, like people following the trends there,
Yeah, so as to essentially just summarize this point, that industrialized processed food was there, and then came the species appropriate movement, which was led by a handful of leaders in this space who were at intersection of being a vet plus nutritionist. And that was mostly to do with raw flesh of other animals being fed to these animals. Right.
Like feeding raw diets or gently cooked meat-based diets.
So plant-based nutrition for these animals were not there. So when did that start?
So like I said, so I think maybe one of the first companies that actually started making truly plant-based food was back in the 70s, which I think was the brand called V-Dog, what we know as V Planet also here in India. And they started in California, I think around the 1970s.
Why did they start that? Like, why did they go against the industry trend?
It was not like an industry trend. They started it because they wanted their dogs to be vegan. So even before like all of this, there were a lot of people who were feeding vegan food to their dogs. So like V-Dog was like the commercial version, right? Like the kibble. But people like Anne Heritage, who like from Europe, UK, who've been like raising thriving plant-based dogs, like on a home-cooked plant-based diet. So all over the world, there were like, people doing their own stuff, feeding in their own way. It was just that it was not very well known, or the awareness wasn't there among the masses, if you will, right? So like Anne Heritage, for example, one of the longest living dogs, Bramble, who lived to be 27, was her dog. And she's raised like several dogs over the course.
So she's an individual who started plant-based food.
Not plant-based food, but she raised her dogs on a plant-based diet.
And then those dogs lived for a very long time.
And now she's written books and stuff on it as well. And all of her dogs like pretty much live to be 20s or more, So which is a huge thing, right? Like something must be right? Otherwise, today, if you see most dogs, like large breeds, 12, 13, mushkil se 14, right? And then they're no more. And her dogs were working dogs, like border collies. That means they're like
healthy, fit.
They need like a lot of calorie intake to be able to kind of withhold that kind of lifestyle, And so really good nutrition is important for them. So if they can thrive, why not others, right? So then people like Professor and Dr. Andrew Knight from UK again, he is regarded very well in the Western veterinary medical field. He does he is a veterinarian. He also teaches in the UK, and he also does a lot of research. So he's been researching plant-based diets, not 1 year, 2 year, but for more than a decade.
Yeah, so exactly. So this is what I wanted to ask. So whatever you have spoken so far is mostly anecdotal, that some person tried raising their companion animals on a plant-based diet that worked. And then there would be other examples who would say that, no, we have been raising our dogs on an animal-derived products and they have been doing well. Where is the scientific consensus on this? Like, do we have enough data to say that a well-balanced plant-based diet is good for dogs and cats? So what is the opinion?
So I'll just take a step back. So animal nutrition, like when talking dogs or even cats for that matter, like humans, humans need like 2,500 calories a day, like the food pyramid and everything. There is certain nutrient requirements that our companion animals have as well. So, and that comes through the dietary feed, for them, or food. So as long as they're getting all of those nutrients, they will thrive. Okay. So,
and are they getting those nutrients from plant-based?
Come to that. So that's where Professor Andrew Knight, he started researching about, because he saw okay, there are dogs like Bramble and other dogs around the world who are kind of thriving. So it kind of intrigued him, and he started researching plant-based diets, scientific researchers, like evidence-based, right? And he's been doing this, like I said, for over a decade. So he's done several studies which have been published in a lot of leading veterinary journals and stuff like that. And he's published all of his research and created like a platform which is called sustainablepetfood.info, where all of this information is now being made publicly available, like the studies and the outcomes of it and everything, you know. So the British Veterinary Association, which follows like the FEDF, or Pet Food Association, I should say, it follows like the FEDF guidelines, you know, like when it comes to animal nutrition, that there are certain guidelines that the dog or a cat has to get all of this nutrients based on this particular guideline to thrive. Okay. And then in the US, or most part of the rest of the world, they follow AFCO, which is the base minimum level that they have to just get these nutrients to be able to survive or thrive. Okay. And then you have NRC, which is most like the fresh food canine nutritionists or like, you know, developers kind of follow in terms of nutrition, which is more or less the accepted gold standard over across the globe. So you have first AFCO, then you have NRC, and then you have like FEDF, and FEDF is the most stringent one.
So these are like the bodies who are regulating what should be fed.
Not what should be fed, what nutrients the animal really.
Yeah. So not the food per se,
Right.
but what
The
are the micro and the macronutrients that
exactly.
these animals need to be fed, and these are like the leading bodies.
Right. Yeah. So governing bodies as well. Okay.
Cool.
So over the last few years, like in the British Veterinary Medical Association, or BVAC, they never accepted plant-based foods as appropriate for dogs and cats. But now, with so much of researching showing the results otherwise in terms of health benefits, they have accepted it as a mainstream diet.
Oh, great.
Which is a huge step, right? Like,
and people don't know this.
And people don't know because these things are not spoken about, right? Because I think there is also this fear that people or the community has, you know, like, because you get judged if you're feeding your dog a plant-based. I was judged for feeding my dogs a plant-based diet. People thought I was like going to kill my dogs, you know.
Yeah, I'll come to the ethical aspect of it, but just to summarize this point, that now we not only have evidence, but also the nutrition bodies associated with feeding animals, they have also certified or put it out there that a plant-based diet is acceptable as long as
it's nutritionally complete and balanced. That's the key.
Okay. And that is same for humans as well.
Right.
Like all the nutrition bodies across the globe have certified that a well-balanced plant-based diet is adequate to take care of all our nutritional requirements. And I think that goes without saying, right? That you just can't feed them anything which is lacking nutrition and then react to it. So that is good to know. But then coming to your earlier point, and this is again to do with the perception that we have. We see dogs as descendants of wolves, and even cats for that matter, we say that they are obligate carnivores, right? Which essentially means that they need, obligate carnivore means what? If I break it down in simple terms, that they need animal-based product, right? Animal-based, like animal flesh to survive. The ethical consideration here can be that, okay, we humans are smart, we have found out a scientific method to feed these animals plant-based diet, which is taking care of their nutritional requirement, but we are taking them away from the nature. And I think that is what you were also referring to, that in doing so, you may be judged by others that maybe this person is being cruel to these animals by not feeding them the food that is designed for them. So what do you have to say about that?
I'll break that into two parts, because first, I think it's important to understand the evolutionary process, because dogs were first categorized as omnivores, then they went back to being categorized as carnivores, and now they've been categorized as omnivores again. Okay. So based on a lot of studies and research that were conducted, like the gray wolf is where the dogs descend from. Okay. So now think about like a wolf being in the wild, in the jungle. What happens? He's going to hunt, he's going to eat, right? Like whatever kill he finds, right? And then he may go through a period of time where he may not find anything to eat. He's not able to hunt because it's not whatever season for certain animals, and there is scarcity of feed basically for him to prey basically to get. So what happens? He goes without food. How will he survive, right? So let's say like when wolves are designed to feast and fast basically, so they go through these periods of feasting and fasting, so their body is designed accordingly. right? So the wolf would need like 50% protein and 50% fat, okay, because they are going to get a prey when they can find one, eat it. So the body needs to have some sort of mechanism to compensate for when they don't find something. So that's why they need so much high protein and so much high fat, because then that is stored in the body so that when they go through the fast periods, the body is able to utilize that. Having said that, when they go through these fast periods, they are mostly eating fruits in the wild.
Oh.
So 80% of the time, they actually end up eating plant matter in terms of fruits or greens that they forage in the wild. And then it's only the 20% of the time is when they're kind of getting the prey, so that's when they end up eating that. So that's how their bodies are designed like a normal wolf, right?
So gray wolf is an omnivore and the dogs are descendant?
No, the gray wolves, the wolves are carnivores.
Okay, but
okay,
you said they...
so they, and this is how they eat and live, right? Like eating, so scientifically they're classified as carnivores, okay?
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like not many people think about it, like that they eat fruits as well, So, and then with the evolutionary process, as man was shifting from the hunting-gatherer lifestyle to like a more agricultural society, and so like the overlap of spaces started happening between the wildlife and the humans, and then I think they started commingling, and I think a symbiotic relationship developed because the wolves started to learn, oh, when this guy is going to hunt, I'm probably going to get some food, So they kind of started developing traits, mental traits, if you will, or like,
dependencies on...
to like, to coexist with the humans. And then the humans started shifting to like an agricultural society from the hunter-gatherers. So the dogs also started shifting along. So we've evolved side by side, okay? So they started getting, eating like plant-based matter, like grains and ancient grains like millets and, like potatoes and a lot of other things. So there was this study that was done by the University of Barcelona in Spain, where they actually excavated the skeletons of dogs. I think they were Bronze Age dogs, yeah. And they kind of analyzed their matter and everything. And what they discovered was like most of those dogs actually ate only primarily plants. Very small amount actually were really carnivores eating only meat, and a small amount ate both, like meat and plants. So there were quite a few who actually ate mainly plants. So that says something, right? So obviously something started shifting. Now, what was that shift? If you look at a wolf, the wolf's jaws and strength is a lot more than a dog, right? Like the dog's jaws are smaller. The muscle strength is lower compared to a wolf because he's no longer hunting the prey and kind of eating, right? The canines have become smaller, right? And then they went through the emotional mental characteristic changes, right, to coexist with humans. And apart from that, they also went through, while still 95% of their genetics mirrors that of a wolf, there's one very key genetic evolutionary change that happened in dogs. So wolves have only like what is called 2 copies of the AME2B gene, which is the amylase-2B gene that is essential for the processing of starch-based matter. So clearly the wolf is not digesting or processing starch as well. And even we humans, as we shifted from the hunter-gatherer to like an agricultural society, we went through the same genetical evolutionary change where the number of copies of the AME2B gene multiplied. So that's how we started processing plant-based matter better. And the same shift happened with our modern dog. So the wolf has 2 copies, the dog has 30 copies.
Essentially, they evolved...
Correct.
To digest food which is coming from a plant-based source.
Yes. I mean, why would a dog accept or go through these changes if it was not going to make him like, live? Like if he was going to die, like he was not going to adapt to these things, right? And the other very essential change that they went through internally was their gut microbiome changed to process plant-based matter. So while a lot of the digestive tract may be shorter compared to like humans, and so for all those changes to compensate, they actually developed a different kind of microbiome to be able to process plant-based matter. Kind of like what happened with chimpanzees too. Chimpanzees are carnivores. But they, sorry, not chimpanzees, I meant the pandas, you're right. But they mostly eat plant matter because their gut changed, the microbiome changed.
Okay, so essentially these dogs over time developed biological traits
Right.
to digest plant-based food. And how about cats?
It's similar with cats also. And a lot of research is showing similar benefits that cats are going through with a plant-based diet as well, So if you think about it, like most commercial foods or cat food, what do they share? Like fish. Cats love fish. But it's a question that we should think. Did cats ever go into the ocean or river and really fish? So is that natural?
Yeah.
What is natural is eating a mice. So the pet food should be a mice, right? Not necessarily a fish. So how natural is that, right?
So essentially, your argument is that if someone is saying that feeding plant-based food to cats is not natural, then how is even feeding fish to them is natural or ethical?
Or chicken or whatever other meats you're feeding, right?
Your core argument is that if they can be healthy on a plant-based diet, that is the only consideration. We should not think about anything else, right?
Yeah, I mean, as long as your animal is thriving, I think that's the key thing, right? We all want them to live longer, happier, and healthier, right?
Okay.
So I think I see like the other big thing, right? Again, this is research based. I've seen like dogs develop allergies to like meat and dairy. Like so they first start feeding out chicken, then they go to lamb, turkey, and then it's this whole chain where they finally run out of meats to feed because the dog is becoming intolerant, and then they start looking out for these exotic meats, right? Then they'll source like a crocodile or an alligator meat from New Zealand and something from somewhere, It never ends. And then after a point, you just run out, right? What do you do?
Yeah. And as a vegan advocate, like I think that is unethical where you are abusing one animal, killing one animal to feed the other animal.
Right.
So of course a plant.
Because in the wild, the wolf was never going to go kill an alligator and eat an alligator, right?
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is also like their body. Why is their body becoming intolerant if you're feeding like a great raw diet and you have to continuously keep?
So is this like an anecdotal observation or is there research coming?
So research, it's a published research that actually states that meat and dairy are top allergens in dogs.
Wow.
Yeah, so
we'll share the link.
Sure, absolutely. We can share these.
But there is one thing as need, and then there is the other thing as the desire or the taste aspect, right? So I think need you have covered clearly that these animals can thrive on a plant-based diet. But then someone can ask this question that, okay, what if I keep two plates in front of, let's say, a cat, one containing animal flesh, the other containing plant-based? What do you think will be the default choice of the cat, to consume the plant-based food or to consume the animal flesh?
Yeah, I mean, cat, dog, both of them, I think. For most of us pet parents, they are like our children, right? Not like they are children, I should say. Let me ask you this question. Like, so if you have a kid and you have a bowl of candy and you have a bowl of like broccoli, what is your kid going to choose?
Oh, that's a very good analogy. So even if the kid chooses candies, as parents who care for our children's health, it's our ethical job to ensure that the kid gets the nutrient from the other bowl as well. Nice.
Like they have that instinctual need to gravitate towards the sugar in the case of a child, right? Because it's sweet, the sensory experience. It's the same with our companion animals too, because of the life from where they have evolved, right? That there is some of that natural gravitation towards the fat in the animal matter, But is it necessarily healthy? Is the question I think we need to ask, because like we see so many animals now like developing health issues, like who've been on good raw diets, gently cooked meat diets as well. And there was a study again done by Professor Andrew Knight, which actually reveals that dogs on plant-based diet not only lived longer, but they also had fewer veterinary bills because the diseases that they encountered. See, health is a state. It's a state of constant being, right? So it's existence. It's something you have to work on every day. Well, because of a lot of different factors, we and our animals are going to encounter deviations from that state of perfect well-being, right? So why does that happen? So what they discovered was the dogs that were on a plant-based diet, and this was a long-term study, it was not like a short-term study. They didn't fall as sick as often. Like, again, I have to call out that these are not dogs on like dal rice or roti chawal. These are dogs that were fed like nutritionally complete and balanced diet. They had fewer diseases compared to dogs that were fed meat. Okay. And I'll be more than happy to share the links. And they also discovered that this was another study that was done in the US. The dogs that were fed, there are similar studies for cats as well, that were fed like gently cooked plant-based diet, had better gut health, better immunity. We all know today as humans, health lies in the gut as well. Like 80% of our immunity is in the gut. This is true for our companion animals too. So it is, the studies are all out there for everybody to kind of look at, research, and make an informed decision what works for your pet. My personal experience has been like life-altering for my dogs.
You talked about your personal experience with your companion animals, and I think you went through some troubles as well, which also inspired you. Can you talk a bit about that?
So when I adopted my first dog, Curry, so I had no clue. I didn't know anything about animal nutrition or. But what I had done was I had researched what options were there in terms of feeding her, because one thing that I was clear, like for me, it was more like a moral ethical thing that I didn't want to feed meat, but at the same time, I didn't want to compromise their health and vitality in so doing. So I had like researched and spoken to a lot of veterinarians and everything. I did my homework, and the day we bought her, we actually started her on a vegan diet, and she instantly took to it. So there was no second doubts for her, like I don't want to eat this kind of, where she came from a primary background of like having eaten only meat-based diet, but she instantly took it. So when we adopted her, she came with health issues where she had chronic.
What was her age when you adopted
She
her?
was 6 years old when we
Oh,
adopted.
okay.
Yeah.
And you were saying that in the first 6 years, she was fed animal flesh, or she was used to it.
Yeah, I mean, she was used to meat-based diets.
Okay.
I don't know what kind of diet,
Okay.
but yeah, because but it was primarily meat-based. So and then she came with a bunch of gut issues, recurring gastroenteritis, and then she was prone to like giardia and things like that quite frequently, like very frequent infections and stuff like that. Also had like a mild heart condition. And we were told that, if she is not going to be fed meat, she will not have a good life.
Oh.
As in, she will not live very long because her heart condition requires certain nutrients, and, her gut would require certain nutrients.
And this was the time when you were a vegetarian.
Yes, yes.
You are a born vegetarian.
Yeah,
right?
born vegetarian.
From
so,
a Gujarati family.
yeah, yeah,
So, okay, so and when you adopted her, so you were feeding her
we
plant.
started with like the wee dog food back
Oh,
then. I think we just did it like for like 3 or 4 weeks maybe, and then
And
we
then the
switched to
vet-
home cooking.
Yeah, and
So
the
the
vet scared you that if you don't.
Well, I wouldn't say they didn't scare me, but the Western vets back in the US, because that's where I was living then, they were more open. I shouldn't even use the word open, but they are more like willing to have a discussion. Like they will discuss things, they will hear your side of the story as well. And so he explained, and so when he said like, this is what it is going to take her to be well, and so then I kind of got into this conversation with him to understand what is it that meat is going to provide her that plants are not going to give her. And then he said like, she will need taurine, which you would never get on a plant-based diet. And of course, I was feeding a balanced kibble, which already was supplemented with vegan taurine. So, and then he was like, like there would be other nutrients that you would need. So we would have to move to feeding a more not processed food, but a fresh food kind of a thing. So then I told him, I'll take it this on me. You give me 2 months, and I will do a fresh plant-based diet for him. I will work with her and see what turns up. You give me 2 months. If we see no signs of improvement, if things are getting worse or going downhill anywhere in that process, I will just do whatever you say and I will not question it. And so then I went back and I started researching, and then I worked with like quite a few well-known animal veterinary board certified nutritionists back then. They're still And they were totally proponents of meat-based diet. But that's when I started kind of using, the whole Ayurveda approach for curry, to start healing her issues. And that's when I was like, no, I need to, like, we also like rotate our food based on the seasons. We tend to eat based on, like what we understand what's suiting our body, not suiting, based on our body types and everything. So then I started like, understanding like what her constitution was from an Ayurveda perspective and everything. And then I knew that, okay, this is like I had to do like a mind-body diet for her that is ideal for her, like. So then I worked with them, and then we started like making our own recipes at home, and we started feeding her all of that. And sure enough, she started shifting. The biggest shift that happened was I could get her off of all the medications within 2 months. She never had to take a medication after in her life. And of course, towards when she was preparing to cross over, we all want to hold on to them. So that was a different journey. But she's lived like a healthy life since, very active, never like lethargic or anything. Her gut issues went away.
She lived up to what age?
She lived to be 18.
18. So 12 years then on a plant-based diet.
Plant-based diet, yeah.
But you said you did your research from Ayurveda, but that time, like, what was your source? Like, you did all the studies on your own, or was there someone else?
No, a lot of my work was self-research, self-studying. But fortunately, I also came across a very lovely veterinarian in the United States. And he practiced Ayurveda for animals. Through him as well, I learned a lot of things. And then later on, like, of course, his practice was more meat oriented, but he was never opposed to what I was doing. So that's where I kind of started adapting to the plant-based applications or principles,
Yeah.
And then we got Brownie into our lives. There was the second little brother that she had chose to adopt. He came with, severe allergy issues, a very sensitive dog, had a really bad, like, dry coat and, a lot of anxiety, sort of. Like, not bad anxiety, but he was good at managing his anxiety on his own. But like, he had like a lot of fear of unknown things, and that's where his anxiety would stem from. And a very good, well-behaved dog in general. So he chose to move in with us because he always enjoyed what Curry ate. So my neighbor who was fostering him was like, he never eats the food that, and her dog used to eat a meat-based diet, and she would feed Brownie what her dog was being fed, and she was like, he never eats what I give. What are you feeding him? So I said, like, yeah, I mean, it's whatever I feed Curry is what I feed. She's like, it's so hard, I can't just get him to eat. And she would take food from home for him from my place to feed him.
And this was all cooked at home?
At home cooked, yeah. And then eventually, like, because he always used to hang out with us on the weekends, he would stay with us because we did a lot of outdoor activities with like Curry, and Brownie was a super agile and very active dog.
Yeah.
So we used to take him on hikes and stuff with us and all of that thing. So, and then we eventually just decided, what, half the time he lives here, he eats what Curry eats, let's just adopt him. And then we decided to kind of, have him. And then he transformed. And so my neighbors were visually able to correlate his transformation, right? And then is when they believed or started like, maybe there's something right in this, So that's how the whole curry and pepper journey began to evolve, because then my neighbors started asking the food for their dogs, because I had no plans of like, yeah. So I think it's just one of those things that.
So essentially, Curry and then Brownie, they were like proof of concept for you, and that's what gave you the hope that maybe this can be taken to the larger audience. Nice. But then, like, now I'm a bit worried in the sense that you are saying that plant-based food is healthier for these animals if it's well balanced. But on the other side, the whole industry, especially if I look in the Indian market, it is like, I don't think plant-based food is even, I mean, you can tell me the numbers, but less than 1% or so, I guess, right?
Correct.
And every now and then, because I follow such pages, every now and then I'll see some content on social media, someone coming and saying that we need to give them species appropriate diet. In fact, I saw a video from founders of one of these brands, and she was talking about species appropriate diet, and it has to be flesh, it has to be protein and fat, and that has to come from animal protein, is what they were saying. The mainstream media or the mainstream knowledge on this is animal flesh, right? So for you, the market penetration, if I have to put it in business terms, has also to do with the educating the masses, right?
Correct. Yes.
And I think that's a huge challenge, right?
Yes, it's very different, especially in India. Like I had to just throw everything out of the door when I did things in the US and just kind of rethink everything because the mindset is very different, like here compared to the West. Like I said, people in the West are a lot more open, because they don't box themselves up in terms of how they approach something. They're always open to listening what somebody else has to say because they can learn from it, or they're genuinely willing to try. Whether that comes because they've kind of experienced, like, or their animal has experienced health issues, or whether it's for the planet or whether it's for ethical reasons. So whereas the mindset here is a little bit different.
And how do you intend to tackle that?
And so that's where we've been doing a lot of education, where so I work quite a bit with like some of these veterinarians that I kind of mentioned and plant-based canine nutritionists, where together we're kind of doing a lot of education in terms of, like workshops, presentations. And some time back, I was very fortunate to have done a presentation for like the Karnataka Veterinary University, and it was overwhelming, the response. The head of the department, he was like, I didn't even know that, like, he's like, okay, I know that there is plant-based diet and this meat-based diet, but he's like, I didn't know that plant-based diet was based on science. The research existed because nobody talks about it, right? So I'm hoping to be able to kind of reach out now to more and more of like the veterinary community.
So you are essentially reaching out to the influential bodies and people in this space so that the education from there trickles down to the
Correct. And I'm also doing a lot of education with the pet parents directly, because what I see is there is no safe space or safe community where people can talk about this without being judged. So I kind of, that's where, like, I think what we did at Why We Care in terms of, like openly, it's okay to talk about these things, There is, like, you can have a debate with somebody. And oftentimes I have like a lot of people who are having their dogs on meat-based diets with certain challenges, then they're looking to now, for whatever reason that has not worked well, or, their issues are not resolved. They're now becoming like, okay, we've tried everything, let's try this as well, But then they have that fear, like, what if, because it's thought that if your dog is not eating meat, they're not getting nutrients, right? So
I think vegans will be the first adopters. Like, vegans would want...
It's actually the other way around.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, that is
at least that's been my experience.
Your experience, yeah. Because I have seen this debate within the vegan community as well. I think that there are vegans who are looking for plant-based solution, right? And that is one of the reasons why I'm having this discussion with you, because a lot of my audience is ethical vegan who want everyone to be on plant-based diet, including companion animals, right? And I get this query on a daily basis. So I know this for a fact that there are people out there who are waiting for this information, that the moment they come to know that plant-based diet is good for these animals, then they will switch immediately.
I think it's again the mindset, like for an ethical vegan or vegans in general, because they care so much about, I'm not saying the others don't, but like
more empathetic.
Yeah, more empathetic towards the animal. I think it's a moral battle for them, like whether this is the right thing, is it natural, whether they should be, So sometimes the struggle for them is a little bit harder than people.
Because they overthink from the perspective of the animal. But that's what I'm saying, that while they overthink, and especially for ethical vegans, if they are convinced that this is healthier, then they will be the first to adopt.
Yeah.
And for the masses in general, I think that is going to be the next round of discussion. Correct. That the masses will adopt in general if the price point comes to that level. So
right now, like, I think, like, even like people who feed meat and then they come to switch their dogs to a plant-based diet, they don't have those moral battles, right? So it's a lot for them. It's clear, it's health perspective, right? And then they see the benefit, and then like a lot of my clients that I've worked with, their dogs have transitioned to plant-based first, and then they've become plant-based. So it's like,
that's a very unique method of activism I'm hearing for.
Yes, I mean, it was always my goal, honestly, because I also viewed like vegan activists stay away, because it's too intense and I just don't want to deal with that,
And yet you are sitting with me.
It's a different journey. So for me, it was always like, like just taking the subtle approach, because I truly believe there's a time for everybody, when it resonates with their mind and heart, it just happens, So I don't believe in pushing people. Like, so even when I work with animals in terms of diet, I always tell that first you have to be ready, because I know your dog will be ready, but you have to believe that this is, it's going to be good for them. Because if you're not there mentally, it's no matter how good it is, it's half-hearted, right? So it doesn't work then. So and I think the challenge here in India is we don't really have a lot of financially viable
and that's
plant-based dog foods.
and that's
right?
what I want to discuss next. But before I do that, I don't know if you're aware of this, so just would like to share with you that there are a lot of communities within the vegan movement which is coming up as well, who are also trying plant-based foods on their own.
Right.
There is an Instagram page called Plant Part Pets,
Right.
and that is run by some of my friends who
Right.
are ethical vegans.
Right.
So, and that's why I'm personally very hopeful that if vegans are convinced on the scientific evidence, the ethical vegans, then they will switch.
Yes.
And it's like once you push through that
I think the battle and the reason why plant-based diets get such a bad rep is because most of the people and most of these communities encourage feeding an unbalanced diet.
Maybe they
and
don't
it's not
encourage-
intentional.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
not
just that
yeah.
awareness is not
Exactly.
there, and the mindset is not there to accept.
Yes.
And
that is true for humans as well, right?
Right.
Like I always tell this to people that if you have become a vegan, it's also an obligation for you, for your body, to learn about the basics of nutrition, so that you are not just eliminating food but not replacing it with adequate nutrition. And I think that education needs to be done in the space of the community animals and companion animals as well. And of course, you are leading the way in that front. But coming back to this question now, that how economically viable the plant-based food is for these animals.
It is actually a lot cheaper in the long run, because I think about it as an investment. So you either pay for veterinary bills or you pay for good food. It's a choice you make, right?
But I totally understand. Being a fitness enthusiast, I completely buy into that narrative that if you take care of your body, for humans as well, then you will pay lesser to the doctors and to the pharmaceutical industry. But people don't think in the long run.
And if you actually do the math, right? So I'm going to give you this really nice example, because when this pet parent, he shared his journey, it addresses exactly this answer. So this guy from California, he has 2 breeds. Okay, breeds are large French sheepdogs. So this breed was created like around the World War, specifically for being part of like the World War activities, kind of a thing. So their need for nutrition is really high. Okay, because they have like really dense, lot of hair coat. Like that needs to be managed, which means a lot of protein is needed, and even like for fueling such big bodies, you need a lot of nutrition, right? So traditionally, these dogs were fed horse meat back then, okay, when they were made. I say made because these breeds are all man-made, right? Like, so that was their diet, that kind of calorie intake they needed, or the nutrition that they needed. Because if you think about it, a horse, look at the amount of energy it has, how strong they are, and so that's the kind of nutrition they were being fed to have good, healthy breeds, basically. And he had not one but 2 of those. And of course, with modernization now, they feed like chicken, beef, whatever, right? So feeding such huge dogs, like a healthy diet, can be quite expensive, right? And so he was doing the least expensive route, which was like feeding a decent quality kibble, okay? And that decent quality kibble, like a 20-pound bag, like he would need like 1.5 bags, like for like 3 to 4 weeks between the 2 dogs, which costed him like $125 US.
125 USD per month.
Not even per month, right? Like
4 weeks.
Like 3 weeks or so, right?
Okay.
And so then he kind of, his partner was like, let's start reduce the kibble and add a little bit of like, like whatever food. Like he's a vegan and his partner is not a vegan. So he's like, I'm going to add like whatever meat scraps I have from my food into his food to like, make the food last longer or whatever. So they were doing that as well. But what they faced really was the dogs had like severe matting issues. Like, so breeds, like matting is like the hair getting all knotted up.
Okay.
Yeah. And breeds have like really long coat. Okay. Like, and it's like Maggie noodles.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to give you a visualization perspective. and it's a lot of hair where you can barely see their face. It's just hair all over, a ball of fluff, you know. So his dogs had to be shaved like every 3 weeks because the mats would be so much that it was just easier to shave. And then the dog would go into depression because they were being shaved, you know. So there's like that emotional aspect as well, right? So then he reached out and he's like, you know, I'm open to trying this, and you know, let's see where it leads to. And then I worked with him. We made a recipe for him.
This was in which year?
This was very recent, like
Okay,
a
so
year.
you are into this.
I was already in India back then.
Okay.
So I also had my own line of dog food, like plant-based dog food, Ayurvedic dog food back when I was in US, like fresh and dry. But then since coming here, like because there the awareness was there, so the level of education that I had to do was a lot less compared to the level of education that is required over here. So that's where I kind of, and a lot of people here prefer to home cook anyways, which is a good thing. So that's where I kind of shifted in educating people and doing that from my journey with what I learned, you know. So we created a mind body recipe for his dogs, and then he started cooking for them. And then, you know, he then just messaged me like last Christmas in December. He's like, you know what? I haven't shaved my dogs in 3 months.
Okay.
And their coat is so soft, shiny. I can use a Dyson air wrap. You know, it's one of those hair styling tools for my dogs. You know, and I did that this Christmas.
Did the cost come down?
And then he's like, you know what? It's not just that, but my cost is less than half of what what I was feeding them before, and I eat healthy because of them. Okay. Like I cook my meals too now. Nice. So you see, it's an because we are one unit, right? Yeah. We're all just like a tiny speck in this big cosmos, right? Yeah. This is all integrated. Like, so that one shifted the entire situation or the family, right?
Yeah. So that was a really happy example, and glad to know that the health improved and also the cost went down significantly. But that is also a very specific example of a specific breed in a specific geography.
No, this is true for all, I think. You know?
So I want to ask in the Indian context now.
Right.
So first, a very simple question: what is the price point difference between plant-based food that we get in the market and also the regular, like these brands like Pedigree and all of that? So what is the price point difference between that?
So I'll break this into two. One is the commercial food aspect, and one is like if you're home cooking, right?
Let's talk about the commercial first.
Yeah. So the commercial, definitely, because there are no nutritionally complete, balanced plant-based foods made in India right now. Most of it is imported. So that drives, because of the duties and everything, it pushes costs up, right? So that obviously is why they are considered as expensive. But if you're home cooking.
But what is the price for, let's say, 1 kg bag of a plant-based food versus a 1 kg pack of?
So like things like a Pedigree or, you know, like,
rules.
Not like, forget brands, right? Like whatever brands that are available meat-based in India, it's quite a bit of a significant difference, where I think the price point could be like 3 times or like 4 times more, depending on the brand you end up choosing.
Okay, so 3 to 4 times premium is what has to be paid for a plant-based food, but that is not necessarily to do with the production of those food, but also to do with the importation of those food as well, right?
There are a few couple brands. So Pedigree is not vegan; it's vegetarian because it uses milk products. Yeah. Jules they market it as vegetarian, but their product is vegan.
Okay.
But the quality of the ingredients is like, in general, I don't believe in feeding kibble, because the process of making it is not very health promoting. Okay, because it goes through something called as the extrusion process. Okay. And then it's very high heat processing, and then everything is leached out, because the way a plant-based diet has to be prepared and given to your dog is not the exact way it is done. Okay.
So essentially, just to summarize this and to make it simpler for everyone to understand, the ready-to-eat food that we get in the market, that is called kibbles.
Right.
For a plant-based, coming from a plant-based source, may not be the good option.
I'm not saying it's not a good option. It's not ideal, I say.
Okay.
Because like whether it's meat-based or plant-based, I just say that kibble is not an ideal option.
So essentially, kibble, whether it's animal flesh-based or plant-based, you are saying is not a good option any which way.
Yeah.
Okay. But even if someone chooses to buy them?
Yeah, I mean, life, whatever situations, lifestyle,
Yeah,
everything, right? Like you have to consider
plant-based is still 3x, 4x costlier in India
Correct,
as of
correct.
now.
I mean, there are some brands like I just mentioned which are not as expensive,
Okay.
but
And these are the regular
yeah.
Indian brands only.
Correct, correct,
Okay.
correct. And you could choose those, but I strongly believe in.
But you don't recommend that because it's unhealthy. That the whole category in itself is unhealthy.
Right, right.
Okay.
And besides, when you cook and feed your dog, you control what you're feeding. So you know, like I gave this happened. I gave that happened.
So now let's
you are in
discuss
control of your dog's health.
Yeah. So now let's discuss the home cooked part which you were referring to earlier, and then discuss the price point in that.
Correct. So home cooked foods are definitely cheaper because especially if you're looking at the Indian household, kitchen and food, our culture is so rooted in food. We have, and we're a blessed land. We have so many wide variety of plant-based ingredients that we can actually provide our companion animals, and like the variety, the diversity is amazing, right? And we also eat a lot of these things. So it's not like extraordinary ingredients that we have to source and provide them. It's simple ingredients from our kitchen, putting it together in the right way and balancing it with the right supplements, and that is it, right? And then you are actually making a good meal for your dog at home, which at the first time it may seem like, oh, this is expensive, but then within a few months you will actually realize that this is cheaper than even feeding any kind of commercial food. Because you're buying it, because our pantries are always stocked, right? Like most Indian pantries, like for example, for us, we buy like in bulk. So your costs are coming down because of that. You're buying like Guju families, right? We tend to buy like harvest season ke time pe jo harvest ho raha hai, we stock up everything. And I think most people here in India do that, right? Like jab rice harvest hota is when rice is being stocked up in their pantries, or lentils, so on. So you're getting good quality produce at the right time, which is seasonally appropriate. So if you are feeding seasonally appropriate diets, you're managing costs right there, right?
Okay.
And then try feeding whatever is more locally available ingredients, right? So you're cutting costs there. And then because now you're preparing things at home, the cost is, you don't have to give a profit margin to anybody, right? So it comes down, and then you see like I think the first time it's because they've never thought about it, right? It's a shift in the mindset, but once they do it like a few times, they realize, oh, this is not a big deal, I can do this. It's all one pot recipes. And then
nice. So essentially, if you cook it at home, then it becomes cheaper.
Yeah.
But then there are two aspects to that, both associated with convenience of cooking at home. One is the knowledge of what to cook, and secondly, of course, the pain of cooking.
The labor, the labor of love.
Yeah.
So the first aspect, the knowledge, is where I think curry and peppers goal. So my whole journey began not because I wanted to be like one of the biggest, dog food brands, like plant-based. That was never my journey. My journey was about empowering pet parents, and it was improving the quality of life for our companion animals. So that was my whole sole purpose when we started. And then when I came here, I realized, see, in US we had the food, lines over there, because it's a different lifestyle and different pace, right? And then when I shifted here, I realized most people cook, and they should be able to do this. And that's where we shifted the model. And then I realized not everybody's going to be interested in studying nutrition, or, figuring out, oh, I have to put X of this, Y of that, and this has to be like, all, like nobody wants to do that math or whatever, let me say, right? So that's where we actually created the curry and pepper meal balancer, which is a supplement that provides all essential nutrients by filling the gaps that would be there in a plant-based diet.
Which people are feeding at home?
At home. And it comes with a recipe.
Oh, okay.
So all the hard work is done. You just follow the guidelines. You just kind of follow that and kind of go through the journey. And of course, like sometimes if the dogs are starting off like from a meat-based diet, shifting, there's this whole shift. And if there is challenging, then we work with those pet parents on a one-on-one basis as well, to guide them through that process and help make sure that the shift is successful.
Okay. So meal planner that you talked about, that is essentially the physical product that your brand is making.
Correct.
Right? And it is essentially a mix of supplements.
Yeah, essential nutrients.
Okay. So the business model that you are following right now is that you're encouraging people to cook plant-based food, but to have a complete plant-based food will take a lot of effort, and that is the problem that you are trying to solve. Okay, you do what you are doing conventionally, but
So what we so instead of the pet parents trying to figure out how to make the nutritionally complete food, the meal balancer provides all the essential nutrients, and it also comes with a recipe.
Okay.
So the pet parent doesn't have to think what I have to feed that will give them all the 37 or the 41 nutrients.
So just to
in
give
a
an
meal.
example, for example, let's say I have a companion animal,
Right.
and I'm preparing dal khichdi,
Right.
which is a very common
Correct.
food, if I'm not
Correct.
wrong,
Correct.
that pet parents feed their animals, feed their
Correct.
companion animals. So in that, your product will have a recipe that, okay, how to modify dal khichdi
To
a little
exactly
bit and add
yeah.
your product to it
Right,
to
because
make
dal
it complete.
chawal or curd rice, like a lot of people, vegetarian people also feeding like just paneer and like,
Yeah.
those are not complete foods
Yeah.
because dogs need like 37 to 41 nutrients depending on their life stage, and they get that only through diet. So making sure that they're getting those nutrients is what the curry and pepper meal balancer and the recipe focus. So you're already making dal chawal.
Yeah.
If you add in a few of these additional ingredients or the ingredients that are in the recipe, and it's the same processing time, right? Like you're pressure cooking and you're giving, right? So nothing in terms of time, it's not a big shift, right? It's more just in terms.
But it's the additional cost that they have to bear in buying the product to make
Right, and it's not super expensive if you kind of compare, like if you were to like if you did the math in terms of feeding like home cooked supplemented food versus like a commercial food, it's still cheaper.
Okay. So essentially, if you take a processed food from outside, which is fortified with all the nutrients,
Right.
versus if you feed them plant-based food plus some of these supplements, this is still cheaper in the short run as well.
Right.
And also in the long run, because like you said, the dogs or the cats will be healthier.
Correct.
But this is for dogs. So for cats, what should one do?
So it's the same concept with cats as well. But at the moment, we don't have something like the meal balancer created for cats.
Okay.
It is something that we are working on, and hopefully in the
It's in the R&D stage?
Yes.
Okay.
It's because cats are very different when it comes to their preferences, and so it's a different. The transition cycle is very different for a cat versus like a dog, especially when it comes to like home cooked food.
A very simple question, and I think this is a question which is very popular with a lot of folks. I put it on our community post as well, that there are a lot of feeders in India, right, who want to feed community animals like dogs and cats.
Right.
What is it that they can feed to these animals that is, one, convenient, second, cheap, because they are doing it on a bulk basis, right? And I'll also tell you, one of the most popular food that people generally feed is Parle-G biscuits, right? I am also guilty of that. I'm saying guilty because I know the repercussions, even though I would want you to reiterate that. What is your opinion on people feeding Parle-G to community animals like dogs and cats?
Great question. Okay, so I've been guilty of doing that before, like curry and pepper happened, right? So I used to feed Parle-G or Mary biscuit or one of those commercial human biscuits, knowing that it has not the right things for them. Because it was not practically possible for me at that time, because I used to come here for short periods of time, then feed them. And then, of course, then later on, like I started switching them to feeding like the vegetarian versions of like the kibble. And then curry and pepper happened, right? So, and pepper, which I've not spoken about, like, so curry was the inspiration, her journey, and then we had brownie. So we had main course and dessert, and so we had to have some condiment, right? So then pepper happened, who was a indie that we rescued, and this was when I was living back in the US. India, she was a little puppy that we had picked up from the streets, like Naman and I. And that time I didn't have enough knowledge that I could take them back with me to the US, तो मुझे उतना पता नहीं था. So it broke my heart when we had to put her in a shelter. And that day is when I decided that I have to do something for our community dogs. And that's when also, I think it was just divine timing that curry and pepper started or evolved, basically. So that's when we started creating like the recipes and stuff. So there is actually a recipe on my blog that you can use for feeding strays, and you don't have to feed like Parle-G. For those people who cannot feed like the recipe, the alternatives would be like feeding like maybe soy chunks, which are better, or like you can actually even feed like simple like homemade things that you make at home, like jowar rotis instead, like you take that and feed. So those are better alternatives than giving like the sugar loaded.
Yeah, so you didn't answer that. So you said
yeah,
you said
that's
that
what
you
I'm
did your research, but in general, what is the problem with Parle-G?
So it's not healthy for them, in simple words, because it causes a lot of like skin issues because it's loaded in sugar and salt, and like same thing with a lot, like some people they said, okay, we will do like digestive biscuit instead. There are a lot of like other human biscuits that come into the picture, but they're all, at the end of the day, it's all maida, which is not great for our animals, like even
not for humans as well,
Yeah.
but for
and
animals.
like that all-purpose flour is not ideal for them. And our indies are so resilient, like whatever you throw at them, they'll just like handle it. So but I think that's not right. So instead, just make a little bit more mindful choices, like giving them, they love soy chunks, you can give that. You can give like these other jowar, like
jowar
rotis and things like that.
And that is so ironical because people who are feeding Parle-G or these biscuits to these animals, they are doing it with the right intention. But what they do not realize is that
they don't have the resource, right?
And unfortunately, they are in a way participating in animal abuse by feeding them something which is detrimental to the health of these animals.
Unintentionally.
Exactly.
And that's where we're actually working. We worked with like 3 shelters right now in Tamil Nadu, where we've shifted them completely to a plant-based cooked diet. And the dogs are thriving. So one of them, we just heard back from them yesterday that like their shelter, they had like 25 dogs and so theirs was a dairy farm that they converted into a gaushala because the person became vegan.
Oh, nice.
So they transformed the dairy, they shut down their dairy farming practice, and they became...
Which
I don't have consent right now to reveal that. So, but
I'll find out if they are vegan, I'll find.
They totally, now the cows are living a free, happy life. They're not milking them or anything. And then he started rescuing dogs. So then now the dogs started living in the sanctuary. Then cats came in, and the dogs would, like the vets would have, and it's in a very small place. It's not like a, big city. So like access to veterinary services is a bit challenging there. So every time they would have to have like from a far place, like every week the vet would have to come and do like this antibiotic for the dogs, or that antibiotic, this, that, and they were doing a lot of that. And then coincidentally, his mom had reached out to transition their pet companion kids to a plant-based diet because they were having health issues, So when they shifted, they got better. They're like, oh, we have so many dogs in our sanctuary. How about we do this for them,
Nice.
So then we did that for them. And now he's like, it's been like almost like 9 months. We've not had a vet come in.
Nice. That is such a nice and a happy story.
Yeah. And like the cows also have some of the herbal things that we donate for them, like that they use. And so it's really working. And I understand challenges for like independent feeders, that it's not possible.
Yeah, so coming back to independent feeders, I think you gave 3 options. One is the recipe that is there on your blog. We'll share the link for that. Second is soya chunk is a decent option.
Right.
And what was the third one? Yeah,
so you can also
jowar rotis.
Jowar rotis. So these are again not nutritionally complete diet. Like
it's
if
not,
the recipe that you're following on the blog is nutritionally complete and economically viable.
What are the key ingredients in that?
So it basically uses things like dal, then like lentils, rice, seasonally appropriate vegetables. It uses the curry and pepper meal balancer, and also like the remains of like oil milling products like the sunflower, defatted sunflower seeds. And so these are all cost effective. And you can kind of easily complete the meal without,
And what about plant-based food for folks who want to feed cats?
So right now, commercial is the best option because it's not nutritionally complete. Like I said, I don't have like a meal balancer right now for them because there are certain...
And those are like the imported ones, or the ones made in India as well is fine?
So, honestly, I don't know of any plant-based...
is made in India.
Yeah, cat food that's made in India.
Oh,
that's yeah. So it's the plant-based. So what we normally suggest is because strays, right, they're going to get other things as well, and you don't want to completely take away their skills of thriving on their own, because then they become codependent on you, right? So you like whatever your budget allows you. If your budget allows you to feed them 1 meal instead of 2, you do 1 meal instead and do plant-based instead, and still kind of stay within your budget. And you're doing like a nutritionally complete thing, instead of like giving something else, basically.
Wow.
So you can work your ways through. You can also give them like things like tofu, and you can mix a little bit of those things so that the plant-based food is lasting a little bit longer. So you can kind of do some of those hacks in there.
Okay. So first option is to feed them the commercially available food and probably pay the higher price for the plant-based option, but reduce the frequency. And so that, I mean, this is going into the philosophical gray zone that we are allowing them to prey on other animals, but
we can't control that. That's their karma, right? So their, whatever you want to call it.
We'll keep that discussion for some other day. But yeah, got your point. But as of now, that is probably the best option. Others is like the plant-based food that we eat ourselves. Because anyway, I may be wrong, but this is how I generally go about it, that when we are feeding community animals, then at that time, at least me, I don't think of the completeness of the nutrition at that time, right? It's for me, it's more like saving them from starvation and giving them what is best available with me. Of course, we should think about feeding them the complete, nutritionally complete food. But if that option is not there, then I generally would say in that case that you save money in other aspects of your life, right? Like, you don't, why do you have to think about?
So you can either feed 10, like since we're talking cats, because of the limited choices, you can either feed 10 cats with some cheap meat-based food, or you feed 5 cats plant-based food.
And I'm saying you feed 10 cats plant-based food, but instead of buying an iPhone Pro, maybe buy a Samsung or something cheaper. Essentially, I'm trying to say that
their mindset,
you can, try to reduce in other aspects of your life to save money and dedicate
just more mindfully, and then
but hopefully, and probably I'll leave it to your leadership to come up with a solution for cats as well.
I'm sure someday that will also happen. I guess it's timing. But yeah, there are like a lot of different options both for dogs and cats. I think we just choose mindfully and we shift our mindset, they shift.
Nice.
So we actually do, our goal is next to be able to come up with a economically viable plant-based dog food, so that these independent feeders can then don't have to rely on
plant-based dog food.
Yeah.
Okay, which is like cheaper.
Yeah, so that's something that's nutritionally complete and economically viable, and not with some, decent quality, I should say. Yeah.
Okay, and I didn't ask you earlier, so generally I asked this earlier, like, why did you go vegan, like from vegetarian to vegan? Just even keep it short and just
I mean, I think for animals, and I guess more like my spiritual path, I guess.
That is, you did not want to participate in violence in any form, and once you came to know about the dairy industry. Okay. One last question that I have for you, which is again a moral dilemma, is to do with the spay and neuter of animals. So especially with community animals, it is a challenge because they multiply, and then if we choose spay and neuter, we are controlling the population, and if we don't do that, then their population explode, and then they meet a very poor fate on street, right? So what's your opinion on that?
This is a very complicated question because it's one of those things between, personally for me, between like the moral karmic aspect and, like the practical reality of the model. The gap is there, right? So unfortunately, we have never been mindful about the human society as such and how we've grown in terms of population and taking over Mother Earth. Like we've never thought about, like, when we create homes, leave some space for the other animals. We've taken away their space, right? Like their land. And I wish there was something for our control of population, you can trim that line off.
No, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
But
if anything, human population should be controlled.
Right. And then we blame the animals, like for like when they're just following their natural cycle. Okay, they're doing their natural thing, they're living naturally, irrespective of whatever circumstances or whatever we've done to our earth. We have to find a middle ground, right? Because we have to coexist. So we have to find a middle ground. And unfortunately, the middle ground is not what most people would want morally or ethically, spiritually, right? Like, because you're altering their bodies, right? From a spiritual perspective. Like, what if somebody did that to you, right? Like,
even from body rights violation perspective.
Correct.
Right? That you don't have their consent to modify.
So for me, so coming from like when I adopted Curry and Brownie, fortunately, I was not in that moral dilemma because when I adopted them, they were already spayed and neutered, right? So I didn't have to make that decision. But like for those pet parents, and I face this question a lot of times, like, should I spay or neuter my dog? Like even companion animals. So there are health benefits from a science perspective to spaying and neutering in terms of preventing. There are pros and cons to everything, preventing certain diseases, and there are certain cons to doing that in terms of helping your animal recover from certain diseases. So it's I think it's a choice that I let individual people make. But when it comes to our stray population, because we have to coexist, I think about it as like, what is the lesser evil, like whether I want mass culling of animals where hundreds of animals are being killed, or whether it's still an evil, but it's a lesser evil where you are spaying and neutering them.
Yeah.
Not ideal, but it's the harsh reality of the world that we live in.
So you are looking at from a utilitarian perspective, that choosing the lesser of the two evils, right? And I'll give you some comfort. I'll share with you what I think. And this is one of those gray areas where I rely on virtue ethics, wherein the intent of the action supersedes
Correct.
the consequence of the action.
Right.
And the intent of the action here, if someone is going ahead and getting these animals spayed and neutered, the intent is for their well-being, right? Even though from deontological perspective, maybe we don't have rights over their body, but given the unfortunate, you rightly put, the human society that we have created, which is very selfish in the way it has been constructed only for us, and hence these animals are legit dependent on us for so many aspects, right? So yeah, so I think purely from the intent perspective, I think it is acceptable under the circumstances. Like to ask you this question, because this is in the news nowadays a lot, is again something of an extension of this problem itself, that is the conflict between community animals and humans. Every now and then we hear of these cases where a dog or multiple dogs bit children and the child died, and then there's an uproar against the dogs, also against the feeders who are taking care of the dogs. So what's your thought on that?
So I don't really want to focus on the political or debate aspect of it. I think we should instead use our time in thinking and contemplating on why this is happening, because if you answer the why, you will have a solution. And I think what we need to be focused on is the solution, instead of getting caught up in these kind of debates and, getting into more emotional aspects and then not getting an outcome. So I think if we just focused on why, we should look at countries like, I'll just give two examples. So Britain, right, or UK, at one point they had like a lot of stray population, really high population, a lot of like see, rabies is an issue in some of the developing countries like India. It's not so much of an issue because it's not prevalent like in the Western world, like Europe or like US. So what happens is like they had like at some point they had the same issue we had, right? So what Britain at that point did was like wiping, like mass culling, right? What happened as the outcome of that mass culling? This rat population increased because the natural cycle was disturbed and they had the plague.
Yeah. Do you think that was, again, getting a bit spiritual from the
karma?
Do you think that was like karmic repetition?
Yeah, everything is a karmic transaction, right? At the end of the day, whether we like it or not. So, and then let's look at another example, right? Like, so Netherlands is another country that has no stray population. Okay. And so we should look at people who've achieved success or failure, learn from that, and come up with what's best for our circumstances, right? So like, for example, Netherlands, they achieved they had the same problem like we did. And what they took multiple different actions because they learned from the Brit experience with what happened. They chose not to do mass culling, basically. So they chose capturing, neutering, and releasing. So they started doing, and their political alignment was with it as well, because the laws in these countries are so strong. Law has power. Unfortunately, law does not have power here,
especially with regard to animal rights.
So the laws were enforced to be able to do that in an ethical way. Not just that, they also stopped, they put taxes, like really high taxes, if people were to adopt buy breed dogs. So people were forced to adopt the stray dogs. 1 million stray dogs got adopted as a result of this policy. Something we can learn from, And vaccinating I think that's also debatable, but that's a different topic. And making sure that vaccinations was being done so that they didn't have the rabies issues, So these are things that we can learn from other people observing and seeing working what works. And that's why I said we should not be focused on these debates because they are never ending. Instead, we should ask why, What is the ratio? Do we have a natural human-animal ratio in our population today? No. Why? Right? So I think we have to contemplate on these things instead of getting caught up in these things and looking at like what are other solutions that we can come up, because I think our youth right now is so creative, so mindful. I'm sure if they kind of use that ounce of like contemplation, we would definitely come up with a morally good solution that works for everybody, the humans and the animals.
Yeah. And you said to focus on the why to understand essentially the root cause of the issue. And I think and you said that we should not get political, but rather focus on the why of it. I think we should get political and focus on the why of it. Like political discourses should have critical thinking embedded in it.
I think if you first understand the why, and you come up with the solution, and then you do the political aspect, right? And I feel like the reason why I'm staying out of the political aspect is because I feel like law has no power when it comes to our animals. Like our law system really needs to be like,
and that needs to be changed
fixed
sooner than later.
And the day that happens, everything will change. Like forget animals. Like, I mean, people are not held as accountable for like the wrongdoings they do against other people also, right? And like in the Western world, when I adopted Curry from the city shelter in the US, they had this quote from Mahatma Gandhi printed in bold everywhere,
The state of the nation.
Correct. And that has stuck with me everywhere. Like these countries have learned from us and they've evolved. I'm not saying that they don't have high kill shelters and all. They're still trying to kind of reduce all of that, and they're making progress. Everyone's evolving, right? If they can learn from us, why can't we learn from our own philosophies and the modern practices that others are following to come up with a proper solution? If you abuse an animal, like if you leave your dog in a car for like in the summer, you can be like imprisoned for that. Okay, and it's not like you pay like a 50 rupee fine and you're out. It's a punishment. You kill an animal, you do animal abuse, and you have life sentence or like death sentence kind of a thing. Unfortunately, none of our animals, even though we are the land of ahimsa, they don't have that status right now.
That's unfortunate, and that's where I'm hopeful about veganism, wherein people develop this innate sense of respect for animals, so that we don't have to rely on laws. Of course, the laws need to be there. For example, majority of people respect human rights, but some who don't.
Right.
And that's why we have the legal system for human justice. I think we need the same as animal justice, but I think people have to change from within first. I think it's always the individual who will change at a massive scale, and then
the society begins with
an individual.
I or you, right? Yeah, and that's why I think like the day we focus on the why and we build come up with concrete solutions, you can push the political or the legal systems with tangible options, right? Instead of just like debating over it, which will not make that shift, because we'll always be stuck in the debate.
Yeah, so essentially we have to rethink our relationship with animals, and that will include all community animals as well. I think in India, people are still cognizant about how they treat community animals like dogs and cats. That's why we have so many shelters and so many feeders as well. But then when we talk about veganism, people think it's some sort of Western concept, and it is essentially the broad view of the same concept where you are trying to coexist with these animals, right? And you're not just limiting yourself to dogs and cats, but all the other animals.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Like goats and hens and everything. So that is something which will happen. And like you rightly said, with individual, when people learn about this, and of course, community animals will be helped as well.
And veganism may be a Western word, but the philosophy is ahimsa, right? Which is so native to us.
Exactly. Yeah. You talked about your product that is essentially a bag of supplement, right?
Correct.
So let's say an average person walks into a pet store and then they see your product versus all the other products that's kept there, which are essentially kibbles. How do they differentiate that this is this and that is that? Like, how do you overcome that as an entrepreneur?
Right. It's more like not apples and apples. It's more like apples and oranges. So, when you go you to a store is a place of business first, right? So it is a point of sale, right? So the mindset is very different. As a pet parent, you're just going there because you're used to okay, this bag of kibble is going to nourish my dog and he's going to get everything out of it. For those of them who are home cooking, if they were to home cook, they would have to let's say they would have to get 10 different supplements. I'm just throwing this number out, okay? But multiple supplements and then add each of them. Like if you think about you're taking your B12, your D3, maybe if your iron is low, your iron, whatever, right? It's a lot of work doing that, right? So, and that's why I said it's apples and oranges, because where we come is of course, we are registered as a business and we kind of have to make profit and all that. But the difference is our goal is not aligned in terms of the bottom lines or numbers. Our goals are aligned with in terms of the number of dogs transitioned, right? So our goal is to empower the pet parents, educate them. So that is the difference between the meal balancer and your pet like the commercial kibble, because and that's one of the reasons why we don't sell this in stores.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're not selling it on stores.
Correct.
So how are you selling it?
So people can just go to Curry and Pepper
Website.
website, and they order. Because people have questions, and your store, we have there are great pet stores. I don't deny that in the work that they do, and they're also very passionate about their animals. So, but they will not be able to provide that information and that connection that happens, right? So that's what happens when they kind of come, that the feeling of being empowered to take care of your dog or cat, like on a plant-based diet, is what happens when they come to Curry and Pepper. And so that is the difference, and once, because this happens, there are some veterinary clinics that carry our products, it's very strange. They see the product there and they'll come to our website and they're like, so I'm like, why didn't you buy from there? They're like, no, we had questions, we want to know more.
Okay.
Right? So that's the difference. So it's more about education and empowering, because every individual that is empowered with this knowledge, it becomes a ripple effect, as opposed to just sitting in the store and then that education, that empowerment is not there, which can be carried forward.
Okay.
And this is happening not just in India, it's happening in UK, it's happening in US, it's happening in Australia. It's almost a global effect. Of course, there are not many, it's just 4 or 5 of us at the moment. But I am sure, and they are doing the exact same things in their own countries, So it's just a matter of time before this becomes the new way of being for or feeding our animals, because the industry has already recognized, they cannot feed the animals the way they are, like the pet food industry, whether it's kibble or raw food, because the hit on our planet is so huge that it is no longer sustainable. Because every year, the size of UK is being deforested in the Amazon rainforest to feed our companion animals, okay? And this is just considering the number of dogs that are being fed in the UK, right?
So this is the same logic with the animal agriculture industry in general, where we say that animal agriculture is one of the drivers of so many environmental problems in our society because it's inherently inefficient.
Yeah.
The same is true for...
You'll have to feed a cow or a chicken for a year, just imagine the resources for one meal.
And the same is applicable for food of community animals as well.
So the cumulative effect is huge, right?
Nice. Really good to know that. Totally agree on that one. And thank you so much, Hetal, for being here today. And I wish you all the best with your endeavors with Curry and Pepper. And hopefully one day we'll have an end-to-end solution for cats as well. And looking forward to the solution that you talked about, where you'll be coming up with something economically viable to feed stray dogs as well.
Thank you so much. And I think it was really nice to be able to reconnect and have this conversation, so that it kind of, I hope, even if it benefits 1 or 2 people to make that shift, it is still a shift towards contributing towards whole life.